Welcome back for another week of episodes, or I don't know how we're saying that. Welcome back anyway.
Right? Yeah. So tonight we're continuing our discussion on the Institute and Basic Life Principles. We're specifically getting into all the social issues that we see within their group. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to help others find us.
Now, before we begin, y'all, let's make it clear the opinions that we present are ours alone. They don't represent the views or opinions of our respective churches or employers. Now, let's begin.
All right. Nice. Feel like the intro was a little off, but it's because we're tired. It's been a long day. It's been a long week, Matt.
Well, normally we say, okay, we're going to do the intro. You do this part, I do that part. Right. And we didn't talk about that beforehand. We just on the fly, we did it. Yep. But we got the disclaimer in there. That's really important, y'all.
That's the important part.
We both, have positions in things that we have and work and church and et cetera. And so we just want you to understand that that's a separate thing. We're not working, doing this show, podcast, what have you, as a representative of that.
Right.
So let's talk about the social issues.
Yeah.
We're going to start with legal battles.
Yeah.
And scandal, really.
You enjoy this a lot. I can tell by your notes, right? You found something and you started digging and you just kept digging and digging and digging until we've got probably 6 episodes worth of stuff here just in the first topic. So
we're going to try to combine this into one thing, but look, so everybody knows about the documentary Happy Shiny People. It's on Amazon. It's real popular right now, and it's talking about the IBLP.
Shiny happy people, isn't it?
Happy shiny people, happy people.
Yeah,
whatever. Fake folks, right?
Yeah.
But yes, I think you're right. They mention about Bill Gothard and about there's a scandal where he molested some young girls and things. He was accused of it, and a big lawsuit and all this. But they didn't mention this.
Right. Yeah. This was
so. Brian, what's it you always tell us about cults?
Eventually, every cult becomes a sex cult.
Every cult. Yep. And the IBLP became one much earlier than we thought.
Yeah. Yep.
So we went through the history and we talked about the IBLP previously was called the IBYC. Institute and Basic Youth Conflicts. And while it was the IBYC, Bill Gothard was in charge of everything. He had a board, but he was in charge. All final checks, all final everything went through Bill. His brother Steve was been involved from the very beginning, and his father Bill Sr., Bill Gothard's a junior actually, was on the board. Well, the staff they gathered staff, and they had as the seminars were getting bigger and bigger, and he was going around the country to these seminars. He gathered local groups who would help promote and put on the seminars in local areas, and he had a national staff there in, was it Illinois, I believe it was, near Chicago.
Yeah.
And he gathered the staff. These staff were people who worked for very low salaries, except for his family members. There's a lot of money impropriety that was alleged in the end of this scandal as well, that his family was paid quite well and often used the organization's funds for their personal use. But he had a sister who worked there, and his brother, his father. The Gothard family was very involved. Okay. And he had a problem in that the staff was encouraged to remain single. That really went with their principles,
Right.
And yet Steve and Bill were known to date at that time, and often dating staff, even though staff was encouraged to remain single.
I can see where this is going.
You can see where this is going.
Yeah.
In 1969, Bill and Steve did the whole campus teams thing, and which led to be the IBYC. So 1969, this is very early into the thing, right? A secretary at the time confessed to moral sin with Steve, to Bill. She confessed that her and Steve had been having an affair, basically.
Right.
And that's a moral sin, especially in this group, because they teach that premarital sex is wrong, it's a sin, etc. As most churches do.
Mm-hmm.
And they teach that. And so she confessed. Well, Bill just sort of ignored it. This went on.
Right. Right. Because Steve was his brother.
Right.
Right.
Right. Sins of the brother, right?
Yep.
Well, then in 1975, 3 more secretaries came forward to having sexual relationships with Steve. This came out. It was quite public within the organization. They were all secretaries there. They apparently didn't know about each other, etc. So when this came out, the board, which, Steve's dad was on the board and Bill's dad was on the board,
right,
went to Bill and said, Bill, you need to handle this. You need to take care of Steve. Well, Bill decided that Steve was too important. He helped write a lot of the publications the group was setting up at that point. And he decided he was too important, so they banished him to the North Office. The North Office was this kind of remote place. It was a retreat. They do retreats and stuff. There's some ambiguity there about who owned what. The organization had bought the property, but Steve owned some of the property, and Bill had a cabin that was supposedly given to him. There was a lot of intermingling of funds back then. Should mention that Bill only made $600 a month back then, officially. Well, that's easy to do when the organization pays for everything else for you.
Right. Yeah.
While he was there, Bill continuously sent new young secretaries every so often to go up to that organization and work with Steve. While that was happening, at least 9 other secretaries were groomed by Steve. They tell stories about how he would approach them and he would touch them, or he would approach them and he would ask them about their sins and get them to confess their sins to him, especially their sexual sins and their thoughts and etc. Yeah.
Right.
And later on, it was said that all 9 of them reported this to Bill, and Bill did nothing. So that's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just, there's so much disturbing stuff here that happened. This is whenever there was allegations the Gothard family was using the ministry's planes. The ministry, the organization had planes. The Gothard family were just flying everywhere on them. So that was in 76. He was banished. From 76 to 80, Bill just keeps sending him fresh new young secretaries to molest.
Right.
In 1980, it just couldn't be hidden anymore. There was too many rumors, things were happening. And Steve admitted to the staff, and then his family, and finally the board, what he had done.
Mm-hmm.
Part of what he had done is that Steve had an aide who was basically covering things up for him and knew things were happening. The aide was using organization funds, and he later admitted to this, to go buy pornography to show at Steve and Bill's parents' house.
Mm.
Right? This just, what?
Yeah. It fits what I said. Every one of them. It happens every time.
So, as a result of all this, Steve, goes to the board and tells everything. Bill arranges with the board that Steve gets a 3-month vacation in California.
Right.
And it's rumored that he was heard joking about it afterwards. Oh, the board just gave me a 3-month vacation.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Sr. had recommended that if Steve would just marry one of the secretaries, then this could make all this go away.
It could all go away. Yeah.
If he'd just get married, it could all go away. How many times have families tried to cover up stuff like that?
All the time.
So Bill and Bill Jr. and Bill Sr. met with 9 different secretaries' families. Because remember, these were young women. I don't know the ages of each person, if they were teenagers or not, but that's possible. But they were definitely young women. And remember, under IBLP and the teachings of Bill Gothard, they're under the authority of their fathers. Correct. So they met with the father of each of these 9 women. And every one of them refused to approve of Steve marrying their daughter. We don't know if the daughters wanted to get married or not.
Right. So when he was sent off to California, right, and the family disagrees, Where does that leave Bill?
Well, so Bill, originally said he was going to sign a statement saying, confessing his own sins there. He refused to sign the statement that he had previously agreed to sign to, saying he knew all about it and how this had been reported to him. They had another staff meeting. Steve, Bill, and 5 of the secretaries all confessed in that staff meeting. This was after the being sent off for 3 months thing.
Yeah.
And then Bill only confessed to mismanaging the situation. He didn't confess to doing anything else wrong, but mismanaging the situation. And it's said that he was quite wishy-washy in that.
Yeah.
Then Bill's aide went to the board and confessed to the sin of what Steve had did and about Bill being inappropriate. Bill was also known to sometimes be inappropriate with women. There were people who testified to the board that, they'd seen him alone with women. One of them walked into his office one day and there was a secretary sitting on his lap. He later claimed him and that secretary were dating, but then later he told everybody he was never dating her and never intended to marry her. Because remember, dating in their culture is supposed to be getting married. Yep. It should never be sitting on your lap, though.
Right.
So eventually the board called Bill in, talked about all this, and like, hey, you got a part in this too. And Bill admitted it in front of the board, and they asked him to resign. So he was asked to resign in 1980. Yes.
Okay, so he resigned in 80.
He resigned in 1980.
And then also resigned in 2014. So what happened between there?
Won't believe this. So this guy named John McLario was hired to replace him.
Okay.
As the head of the board or what have you. McLario went to the staff because there was all these rumors and all this stuff that happened. And he went to every staff member, had a big meeting, and basically said either resign now or shut up about what happened.
That's
Nothing
excessive.
else is going to happen.
Okay.
We're done. We're done with the situation. Shut up about it forever or resign. Over half of the staff resigned.
Yeah.
That was devastating.
Surprised it wasn't more.
Right?
Yeah.
17 days later, McLario resigns. He later had his own sex scandal.
Of course.
Bill Gothard was reinstated. So only 17 days after he resigned, he was asked to come back. They did give him 3 months of leave as a punishment. Now, it did change something, which is going to change something later, in that now Bill reports to the board. Used to, Bill was solely in charge. Now he reports to the board.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I remember we talked about that, kind of briefly in the teachings, right? Because there was that weirdness that he was at the top of the pyramid, and then you pointed out that eventually he was subject to the board, and this is when he became subject to the board.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's a big thing in a lot of ministry things, and being subject to the board is a huge thing. So at that point, he became subject to the board, but the board still did a lot of covering up. They had a lot of infighting. So they had the national office and the board and stuff. Then they had little regional areas. Yeah. And those were groups, often volunteers, who got together and helped put on the seminars in their areas. One famous one is the LA office. They fought back and forth with them. The LA office didn't feel like Bill had done anything to repent or work through his sin, disobeying his own teachings.
Right. And
they didn't want to have the seminar in LA until that was done. And the board fought with them over and over again over a couple years until they had the seminar anyway. Because here's the straight financial situation was they had a lot of money because they had bought a lot of properties. They'd spent a lot of money, but they needed the seminars to keep making money. So they went around their own group, their own organization in LA, and had the seminar anyway without them. This was a group of organization of local pastors and things there who were supporting them to put those on. So they still did a lot of infighting. Like, this really rocked the organization.
Right.
And almost killed them.
Yeah. Seems like it.
Bill, while he was out for his 3 months, arranged a meeting of well-known pastors at his personal church. Now, remember, he says he's not a preacher, and this is a ministry, but it isn't a church, right?
Right, yeah.
He personally went to LaGrange Bible Church and was actually ordained from there. And he was arranging a meeting there of all these well-known national pastors. one of them basically to come out and support him, that he'd been through a trial and been through some sin and support him. The board squashed that.
Okay.
They squashed that because that wasn't going to be helpful.
Right.
The church refused to do any church discipline on him. A lot of people said that you should go to the church. You go to him directly and then go to the church, and the church should have had something to do with discipline. They refused to discipline him, saying he wasn't under their authority. Which again kind of goes against his own umbrella of authority, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
They said it was a corporate matter. That's why.
Okay.
Right. And then one other thing in this whole thing from 1980 into 81, the former staff members that left, they tried to see that they wanted to force Bill to repent, basically come to terms with this and repent. And they tried to, they filed a class action lawsuit against him. They met with a lawyer and all this, and the lawyer said, and their whole point was to get to Bill to testify, to get a deposition.
Yep.
Never made it. They ended up getting deposed. And one of them was that aide who had testified to the board, but he never did do the deposition. And the board hired a big time law firm, and all they had was a little lawyer from Topeka.
Right.
And no, not our favorite hateful lawyer from another episode of the Westboro. Yep. So the lawsuit was actually dismissed twice. And they just went on. Nothing really happened. All that mess, all that drama, all those people hurt.
Right.
Nothing happened.
Nothing happened. And he hung out for another 34 years, continuing in the same vein until...
Well, it got worse.
It got worse. And then they kicked him out, and he's been out since. They haven't brought him back in this case.
Well, he's pretty old now.
Right.
So the second Gothard sexual harassment scandal, Steve is out. Steve's gone.
Yep.
And in 2014, recoveringgrace.org came out with all these stories of victims of Bill Gothard. Just a couple of people, and then it was 9 people, then it was 34 people.
Mm-hmm.
These were all young women or teenage girls. They weren't all, I don't think they were all, I think some were minors.
Right.
They came out, they were sharing their stories about abuse and things he'd done. Now, some of these were just creepy stuff. I'd get with them and rub their feet and touch them inappropriately and things like that. Just super creepy, weird stuff. Just perverted old man stuff. Y'all know what I mean, right?
It's true. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So in 2014, that came out, and the board asked Gothard to resign again.
Mm-hmm.
Gothard did resign. Some of the victims got together in 2016 and filed a lawsuit against him. Gothard threatened to countersue them. And the reason that's important is because remember what happened in the last time there was a lawsuit. He hired a big bag law firm and just buried them until the lawsuit got dismissed.
Right.
This case, he threatens to countersue them and really went, full, we're gonna get back at you. This is slander, da-da-da.
Mm-hmm.
In 2018, they dropped the lawsuit due to that pressure. There were some claims that some of the claims might be beyond the statute of limitations and things like that.
Yeah, but...
kind of related to that, I recently read Ginger Duggar Vulo. Ginger Duggar's book while I listened to an Audible. And she was talking about an interesting thing when her and her sisters were at the mall one time and they were checking out different clothes and stuff, and she tried on a blonde wig. And she made a joke, "Oh, look, I could be a Gothard girl." And she was saying that as a teenage girl, they thought that was funny because people in the organization had noticed that he would pick young girls. He'd go to them and he would say, "Oh, you need to come work at a National with me."
Mm-hmm.
And actually, Ginger had worked at National a couple of times and interacted with Bill Gothard. She talked about when she was a kid, she was so excited when he came to their house one time. And I think he played some game with them outside, some sports game, and she was super excited about that. But when she was up at National with her sister and he had complimented them. You know, so there was this thing going around that he liked to pick certain types of girls. So they were joking because she was wearing a blonde wig that she could be a Gothard girl. She said,
Right.
you know, as a teenage girl, they laughed about that, but now she realizes how horrible that was. How that was not funny at all.
Right. Yeah.
So people in the organization noticed this was happening. If you see something, say something.
Absolutely.
Right? Look,
Yep.
I used to hear that and I always think about like 1984 and, you know, talking about the police and the threat to the government. Ain't that kind of thing. A lot of victims are victims and they can't stand up for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You think there's something wrong, bring it all to light of day, especially in ministry. We want everything visible to the light. You know what the light does? You know,
scatters the darkness.
Yes. It cleanses things, you know? So bring it all to light, make it all visible. There is no reason to cover these things up.
Right.
You know? But that's exactly what's happened in this organization over and over again. You know, when we started this, I questioned, you know, is this really a cult? And I tell you, this we're not in the response episode yet, but this is sure making me go further to the occult side.
Yep.
For this organization.
For sure, Matt. Well, I appreciate the lesson here because this is a lot of this is new to me. You know, I mean, I read through your notes, but this is quite a bit of stuff. And
I don't understand why this wasn't in the other documentary. So I think the people on YouTube be interested to hear about it. Yeah. Y'all can find more about that at recoveringgrace.org.